Hey there, I am Tracy Otsuka, your host. Welcome back to ADHD for Smartass Women. My mission, you know what it is, to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. After meeting thousands of ADHD women, I can say this with confidence. Every single one is brilliant at something, no exceptions. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Elizabeth Elfenbein. Elizabeth Elfenbein is a creative powerhouse and purpose driven leader who lives at the intersection of women's health, equity, and storytelling. She's the founder of Under the Sisterhood, a global platform that uses real, unfiltered stories to educate, connect, and empower women across generations. Through the groundbreaking Under the Hood of Women's Health platform, which she founded, Elizabeth tackles the most overlooked women's health issues across every stage of life while shaping what the future of equitable healthcare should actually look like. She's also the force behind Otherhood, a health equity agency, and Sistergood, a nonprofit supporting sister leaders in developing countries. With deep roots in branding, design, and advocacy, Elizabeth turns big ideas into action and makes sure that underrepresented voices are not just heard, but amplified. Welcome, Elizabeth. Did I get all of that right?
Wow, it's so funny to hear it on the other side. No, it's wow, kind of cool.
I love it. So, obviously, Elizabeth, I want to talk about everything it is that you do, but where we always start is with our ADHD stories. So, I know that your awareness of ADHD came through your child's experience, which is true for so many of us. So, can you share a little bit about that journey and how it may have changed how you now see yourself and your brain?
Well, it was funny when we actually did our interview, it got me thinking about the journey, and it was through my child's diagnosis that got me to start thinking about, well, and not thinking, oh, these things happen intergenerationally, just wow, this all kind of makes sense. And I started going over checklists and thinking like that, and I'm like, yeah, maybe I've had this for a long time. It kind of makes sense when I think of the journey of my life that I myself had ADHD. And I haven't technically been formally diagnosed with it. I've never been on medications for it. However, it's clear that I have struggled from some of the same things when I look at my children and I look at the challenges they've had, that I clearly had ADHD, and probably as a young kid.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're born with, you know? So when you say probably as a young kid, what was Elizabeth like as a young child?
Thank you for that. I struggled a lot academically. I came from a very academic family and had a lot of pressure to be academic, but that just wasn't where I lived. That wasn't my safe space. I created in my parents were separated and divorced at a very, 5 years old, separated. So I lived with my mother, and the spaces I created were always really beautiful, like beautifully designed, every single detail down to the letter. I'd go in, I'd do competitions, local competitions at the library for poster design, I'd win them. And I found that art and being creative was really a space that I could be successful in. But I really struggled academically. And I think, when you come from a family rich in academics, there's so much pressure. I could never fill those shoes. And I was lucky in a way, my mom and dad were very different people. My mom was more creative, and she really said, listen, you need to find what makes you happy. And when I was going off to, through high school, I was an average student, above average. I wasn't a C student, I was a B student, getting by. And, I had an older brother who was just brilliant, just so book smart. Like, yeah, he was going off to Ivy League. And the expectation was that we would all hopefully go there. And we were made to feel like if we didn't, we didn't amount to much. And that was a grandparent thing, dad's side. But interestingly, my mother just like kind of knew, and she just said, listen, Elizabeth, junior year of high school, what is it that you love to do? And I said, I love art. I love art. And I didn't say specifically what. And I started building a portfolio that summer. And, senior year, I went and I knew I wanted to go to art school in New York. I did apply. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, so I did apply to schools in Philadelphia as well. But having an aunt live on the Upper West Side and having gone to visit her, I was like, these are my people. Like I kind of knew. And I didn't know, when you think about the context of where we are today and talking about ADHD, you didn't know that you were different in that way because of these things, if you will, these diagnoses. You just knew you were different and couldn't quite attach a label or anything to it. So I was fortunate enough, worked very hard that summer. I worked and then worked very hard on developing a portfolio, and applied to several art schools and got into Pratt Institute. And that was when I found that I actually could be really good at something. And I think as a child, my journey, what I was good at, I was very industrious because my parents were divorced. And while we were a white collar family, meaning, my father was a physician, an academic physician, we didn't have money. So I had to work to buy the things I wanted. I had to work to help put myself through school. And so I did that, and I was very industrious as a young kid, but it wasn't industrious attached to something. When I say tangible, a skill set, like I could go and get a job and work really hard, and I was very good at that. So when I went off to art school, I just found, like, I don't know, my purpose, my calling. I just felt like I referred to it earlier, my people. I felt like I was in the right space, that I could have this freedom to figure out who I was and find myself, and show up as my best self. And again, I don't think it's when 17 years old, 18 years old, you're thinking about, oh, I want to show up as my best self. Not back then. Maybe today the kids are more conscious of that. But what I did do is I did the work, and used that opportunity and that platform and that education to really help both inspire me and motivate me and encourage me to move forward in the creative space and fields that I've been in.
So, when you say that you struggled in grade school, probably junior high school as well, even high school, right? You felt like I'm smarter than I can show my grades, my grades are. Wait, I'm smarter than my grades are. That's what I was trying to say. So, I'm curious, do you think that you have a learning difference, or do you think that it was just you were not interested in that subject, or a little bit of both?
I think the third, a little bit of both. So I do think that I have a low level dyslexia. So I read things, I have to reread through sentences. And even today, I am very conscientious of my reading. And now I think, with audiobooks, it's really good for me because I can hear it and I don't miss things. Whereas when I read it, sometimes I can misconstrue how it's meant to be said. And so it's an interesting thing, I mean, to say that out loud and publicly. Yes, I'm human. But knowing that as a kid, so I really struggled. And so it wasn't just with, hey, I'm not interested. It was truly having a learning disability as well. And it never, I think, it wasn't until adulthood that I had the conversations with my mom and stuff, like later in life, that I really struggled with that. And it kind of all fell into place and made sense.
Absolutely. So, how were you socially? Were you able to find your people early on, or did you always feel kind of
Mm.
like the odd duck out?
A little bit of both. So I grew up in I guess, a middle class, a lower middle class area outside of Philadelphia. We lived in a development home, and I come from my background is Jewish, and I'm like anti-labeling us anything, but I happen to be that. And our neighborhood was broken up into predominantly Irish Catholics and Jews, and there was just not a love for each other. Like, shouldn't say that universally. I think that there was segregation in a way, and we had our family got vandalized through some of those family. Like there were things that happened as a child, so which left like serious trauma as a kid. And so what I would say is my friend group, interestingly, so I go off in high school, and the reason why I set up the distinctions of the communities is I got involved in a Jewish youth group called B'nai BBG. And that's when I found more friends. I had a couple of neighborhood friends, a couple of girlfriends, and then we signed up for BBG. And it wasn't because it was like I only wanted to have Jewish friends. It's just because that's what I fell into, because it was just not the best area for us to be living in. It was a community that wasn't welcoming.
I'm sorry. Ah, people. So, when you left Pratt, did things get better once you got out there into the workforce?
My 4 years at Pratt were the best educational experience I've had in my lifetime. So I just want to say I went to the campus in Brooklyn. I had 4 amazing years. I had relationships with professors. One of my professors came to my wedding. And so like maintained a really, really wonderful experience throughout. And then when I got into my career, I stayed in New York. New York's been the place that my career began and continues. And even though I live outside of New York, I've always felt that was, the area, like instead of going out to California or what have you, New York was the place that I could do my best work and be amongst the most talented people. And so I was very fortunate to get into companies and, work really hard, really, really hard at trying to get good at my craft and my work. And things just sort of happened organically.
You have built so much brands, platforms, movements, and you've done it all in a very traditionally driven ADHD way. Can you talk about how your brain works in your favor, especially when it comes to creativity and innovation?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm excited to answer that. I want to step back a little and give context. It's interesting in the business world, it doesn't matter what company you're in, there's all kinds of politics, people vying for different things. I've never been wired that way. I've never been the mother who cares about what the other families are doing. I've always focused on the idea, the family, what have you. And so as it relates to the ideas and the movements and the way my ADHD brain works is I see unmet needs. Like I'll have a moment, I meditate twice a day now, and I can be in meditation, I do transcendental meditation, and I'll be thinking about something, or I'm going for a walk, and I start reflecting. I'm like, oh yeah, it's otherhood. I have been working with marginalized communities for the past decade, giving them voices. Oh my goodness, how have I not put this together? So I went from unmet need to unmet need to unmet need. So, like, I'll give you an example. And I'll cite this example of the gross national happiness quotient, like it's probably it's below at an all time low. But in 2013, there was just a feeling, and I had this idea. I'm like, I want to create this happiness niche social network, and it was based on what was going on. Facebook where it was, and what have you, and the microblogging space started rising, if you will. And so I said, well, what if I could do something to change the gross national happiness quotient and use this sort of thinking? And I created, with a team, but the idea started with creating a business plan to get the owners of my company to fund it and say, look, this is a problem and this is an unmet need, and here's how, I think we can solve it. At the time, I was also chartered with, at this particular company, how do we make our company known to be the most creative and the most innovative? So I had the charter in my roles to do these certain things, but I had a blank canvas as to how I could do them. And so that was one great example. I felt a pulse, I felt this feeling, and I'm like, I have this idea. And then a couple of years later, and we did multiple events, experiential events. It was very hard. We won many, many awards for it, and I was named an OMA All-Star, but it was very hard to get adoption. And so a beautiful app and beautiful experience. I think we were just ahead of our time and needed more funding. But then a couple of years later, my younger brother, wonderful guy, his wife was ill with ovarian cancer, and he was his caregiver. And we would talk every morning on my way into work. And I would sit there in tears, and I just felt his pain being an empath. And I'm just like, what can I do? Like, he's sharing, and I'm like, you know what? We need to give voice to caregivers. And we created Caregivers Speak Up and did a series of documentaries. We launched it in Cannes. And I said, Mike, and his wife had passed, so he was the one who was the grieving caregiver. And I said, would you come with us? We'll bring you to Cannes, and you can talk about your experience and get on stage. And so he came and he shared. And it was a very moving experience, these series of documentaries, and of course, being able to highlight the unsung hero that my brother was. And so giving him that space to really be celebrated. And that's when that phase of giving voice began. And then when I left the organization, I went to Comcast, and Comcast is a self-insured company. They have over, at the time, 130,000 employees, and they serve over 250,000 people with their benefits. And I said, look, we're creating technology for caregivers, we need to go on a listening tour and really understand if we're going to go in and do this for them, what their unmet needs are. And so we did another series of documentaries. I was able to convince them to do a day in the home of the caregiver because they're in 85 million American homes. And so all of these, basically what I'm getting at in sharing this is I saw an unmet need in the context, the space, the situation I was in, and I just ran to the roar. And Tracy, I think when you ask about the ADHD mind, creativity and innovation, like I am, I love people, but I love people as it relates to ideas, deep thinking, deep talking, diversity. I am not interested in small talk and small situations. I love Eleanor Roosevelt's quote, small minds discuss people, average minds discuss event, great minds discuss ideas. That's the space I've kind of naturally always leaned into. Not that I haven't heard gossip and haven't been part of it. I'm not proud of that, but it's not something that's not a space. Like I want to live in the idea space. And I think even, having left the advertising industry at this stage of my life, I even more know that I don't want anything to distract the innovation and the ideas and the ability to get into communities and affect change.
So, just out of curiosity, and I probably should have asked this question first, but was the advertising space from the minute you got there, were you like, these are my people and this is my thing? I am good at this.
Well, kinda, yeah. I mean, what's interesting, I was not an advertising major in art school. I was actually a graphic and package design major,
Hmm.
but I took a year of advertising and I just got into it. We had a senior show at the Puck Building. All these agencies came in and I started getting opportunities that way and I fell into it. The thing that's beautiful about advertising is you can come up with the idea and design it. And so I was fortunate throughout my career, because I've been in the business for over 30 years, I've worked on all, like health and wellness, probably the bulk of my tenure, but I've worked on like brands like Citibank and MetLife, Wall Street Journal, Delta Airlines, Tide, like all kinds of Wall Street Journal, Microsoft, like all kinds of big brands. And I think the health and wellness space, of course, you feel like you're doing more, like you can affect greater change with the work you're doing. But I did feel it was about my people. It did feel like it was like I could be my authentic self. And I think that when you are living with this and when you have such a different mind and a different way of seeing things, if you can't show up as your authentic self in any type of environment, it's tricky. And so I think to your point, I did. Yeah. I'm like, I found it. These are my people. And not every job, not every situation were my people, but by and large, the sphere was my people.
Well, the thing is, if you're so good at that and people notice how good you are, of course you're going to do well because people are noticing how good you are at this thing. You are noticing how good you are at this thing. It's all positive emotion, and then you basically can write your ticket. They want you. Is that true?
Yeah, it is kind of true. I mean, it's really interesting. I just got finished a different podcast and I was saying, with the guys and growing up in the business, and having mentored several young men and women, the gentleman will say, I want to be a creative director at age 30. At age 30, I had my first child. I had Olivia. And I wasn't thinking about being a creative director. I was thinking about doing a great job so I could pay my bills and support being able to continue my career. And so I don't think I had the same, like, I think, as women, we go through different, like things happen in our life stages differently. How's that? And I think, when you start building a family and you have a career that you're passionate about and you want to keep doing and you have that interplay, the thing that's wonderful about my career and what is wonderful is being creative. So I get to do something I love to do. Because when you think about taking time away from your children, gee, it better be for something that you're happy doing. And so I've been fortunate about that. But I think, yeah, you go out and you work hard. Tracy, I think the biggest thing for me, and I think I get this from my father, his work ethic. It's tireless. Like, put in the work, put your head down, focus on doing a great job. And I think that, having three children, needing to put them through schools, through colleges, buy houses, do the things that, you want to give to your family, my focus was always on doing a great job. And so, and it's interesting being a woman in that business at that time, it was not as easy. So.
Even though you were so good at what you were doing, do you feel that there were times that maybe you didn't get this promotion or you weren't assigned to this project because you weren't a man?
I think it was more the promotion, never the project. I always got the great work, always got the great assignments, you know. No, I never didn't get the assignments. I had one situation, we had a new business pitch. I remember this. I don't know if I was 26 or 27 years old. I'm in with the president CEO of the company. And it was a good sized Versace company, and he told me to make a change to the idea I did. And I looked at him and I'm like, "Gavin, yeah, no, I can't do it." And he says, "Okay, then the idea won't go to the client." I said, "Well, then I guess it won't go to the client." He loved me.
What happened?
I was very bold at a young age until I had my children. I became, if I was 150% bold, once I had my children, I was down to 100% bold. I just said,
Why?
because I just said, well, because I wanted to make sure I didn't alienate myself. But
Yeah.
in this situation, I felt like I just had integrity. I'm like, if I add what you're suggesting, that's going to make it contrived. And I'm not doing that. If you want to have someone else do it.
And so did he agree with you? Did he back off?
He backed off. The I didn't go forward. And I'm like, okay. And then 2 years later, I was playing him on a squash court, in other words, he respected me because I stood up for my beliefs. And, I've always done that. And that's not the easiest path. And I don't know if that's an ADHD thing or not, but
Oh, yeah. Challenge the status quo. That is an ADHD thing when we are in our best brain, right? I think what happens to a lot of women is they don't do that and they second guess themselves and they listen to what everybody else tells them to do. And so no wonder they're miserable, right? They're not in their right environment. They're not with their own people. They're not in the right career. They're usually not in the right relationship. You could see how that would get difficult, more difficult than a neurotypical because of the way our brain works. So I know you love to talk about time management. I also love that you agree that when we talk about an ADHD brain, it really is not about time management. It's about managing energy. So I would love to know from you, what have you learned about yourself and managing your own energy rather than your time? And how has that actually changed your relationship with productivity?
I love this question, Tracy. Really love it. I've always been good at managing time. Probably when I recognized that I had probably have ADHD, um, I shifted to looking at it from an energy perspective. And what I mean by that is like through, up until 2017, I was in this job and I was doing everything rote. I was on autopilot. I could do everything I needed to do really well, but I was numb and not feeling it. So that's where I was really productive and time efficient. When you speak about energy, I think that it comes from, for the past 7 years, I've been very focused on self care. So I'm actually as productive. I work really hard, but I take a lot of breaks, and I think that doing all these things from a self care perspective allows me to show up and use my energy very wisely. And because I'm also in a better, happier state, if you will. And so, what I mean by that is, I meditate twice a day, I do breathing exercises, I journal every morning. I'm all about gratitude. I know that sounds crazy and could sound trite to some, but I think that if you want to live in the space of what isn't, it's going to be hard to get out and be like, from a creative perspective, I think that keeps your energy, low vibe energy. And then I would say that, getting out into nature, like walking in nature, like I try and journal. In 30 degrees, I'm out with my mittens and I take the mittens off with my journal and I'm out having coffee on a pier so that I can be breathing fresh air, doing things that get me like into a really great sort of state. And so I think that sets up my high vibe energy. I've always had a good energy. I've always been incredibly productive. So I'm not one of those who doesn't go through the list and isn't able to get things done. I will forget something. Like if I go back 15 years ago, when I was a partner and creative leader at that organization, I would forget, like there were certain things with the kids, the husband would have to remind me, hey, did you, or, what's for dinner? I'm like, yeah, I kind of don't know. And you figure it out type of
I
thing.
don't care.
Well, yeah, I kind of, I wouldn't say that just to keep things calm, but I didn't care. I'm like, I'm not going to be there to eat. Figure it out.
Wait a minute, you weren't even there and he would call you and say, "What's for dinner?" Oh.
I'm not married anymore, but and I don't cook unless I want to. But I think what's interesting, Tracy, about that whole thing and shifting from being time efficient to looking at how I show up, not energy efficient. I don't like that either because that makes it transactional. When you're in a good high vibe energy, you can accomplish anything. And so one of the things I used to get into a little bit of trouble at my last job because I could be in a partner meeting with 10 people around the table, and from week to week, they'd be discussing the same thing, but I'd be working on something on my computer. And my partner would say, Elizabeth, can you pay attention? And I'd be in flow creating, and I'd look up at everyone and I'd say, no, I can't. And they'd say, well, why not? And I'd say, because you're going around in circles. You said the same thing last week and we're not getting anywhere. I'm in a state of flow and I'm going to stay in the state of flow. And so I think that understanding that when your energy, I was like, I was buck the status quo. I was a Tracy Junior or Tracy Senior, but it served me at times really well. But, but now this next phase of my life is looking at like, how do I want to show up now, Tracy? What do I want to do? I have so much I want to accomplish, but how do you do that? And if I go and look at it about time management, nah, I'm going to look at it about how I want my energy to show up.
I want to point out too that the fact that, or the reason that you could constantly stand up is because you were in an area that you were being you, 100% being you. And so people, they weren't threatened. Well, some of them probably were threatened, but they knew better because you were so good at what you did, right? Or what you do. And there was such great interest. So that's how you get to that point, and that's how you build confidence is in your area of strength, not trying to shore up what you struggle with and don't do well, like maybe picking the kids up on time. And I don't know, are you good at that? Because you said you don't really have a problem with time, which I, attribute to, yeah, it still sounds like ADHD drivenness to me, because I can be exactly like you, but I can also go down the rabbit hole where I'm working and all of a sudden it'd be like, oh my God, my kids are standing there waiting for me. I forgot I had kids. Did that happen to you? Or are you good in that way too with time?
To be fair, that was not like in the responsibilities. So when I was working these crazy hours, I had a full-time nanny. And at the time when the ex-husband was home, so I didn't have to do that. I never missed a game. The weekends, I was never late for anything, ever. And I made like I went to excruciating care of trying to make beautiful family dinners, everything homemade, special. We entertained all the time, like everything to show up. Where I think where the ADHD mind comes in, and we talked about this on our podcast, Tracy, which I found fascinating, is I've never sat and savored any of my successes. I've always thought, what's next? So, like for me, it was less about the things are, hey, did you sign the note for the kid or whatever, or I didn't miss a conference per se. The little things that did you get those pair of sneakers type of thing. But on the other side of it, where I really have struggled with is really sitting in and just savoring. Hey, that was a great thing I just did. I'm so proud. Like I don't know if I know the feeling of being proud, I say the word, but what does that feel like? And so, that I think is kind of an interesting piece of the ADHD puzzle, right?
So, in your self care, is that something that you actually work on? I mean, you meditate, so you know what it feels like to get into your body and feel that positive emotion of being proud of yourself. Is that something that you do now?
Well, I would say that I still am not like I'm proud of my kids. I'm proud of the things that exist that I've touched, but I don't take necessarily credit for them. It sounds kind of crazy. I'm just like, wow, it's like I'm just about, well, how do I make it better? Like what's missing? How can I make it better? That persistent drive to, is it good enough? Can it be better? How can I, at the same time? So I don't, even though I do all this work and in the gratitude, you do a lot of self-affirmation and stuff like that. We do things that just affirm who we are. And I think I have to say, I have to give a shout out to my middle daughter. Georgia does all this healing work and she's a medicine woman, having ex-Wall Streeter, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. And living in gratitude. I mean, she does it. My son does it. I think my older daughter does it. I think that it's a great space that doesn't necessarily, for me, necessarily connect with pride. I'm a proud mother of the humans my children are. Yeah, I guess I'm proud of the human I am. I'm a good person, but not for the accomplishments. Is that weird?
I think that's probably a good thing, right? You are a wonderful human just by existing. It's not about what you're achieving. And ultimately, that's the goal.
Mm.
And maybe you start out, developing confidence and feeling better about who you are and understanding your abilities by accomplishing certain things. But also, to me, the thing that I am most proud of is the job I've done with my children, right? Being a mom.
Tracy, I love that. I love that. And it's funny. This morning I was sitting out on the pier. I finished journaling. I called my daughter Olivia, and I because she knows I'm like, yeah, I was just writing about this. I just want you to know I'm so, like I said, I've been thinking, I think a lot about you guys. And I was telling her about our son Ian, or her brother Ian, who's living with me now. And I just said, I'm just so proud of you. I'm proud of the kind of people you are. And it's very interesting, Tracy. It isn't about accomplishments, it's about the kind of humans you raise. When you put them outside into the world from a humanity, from a kindness perspective, what have we raised? What are we role modeling? And so, yes, I'm very proud of that.
Totally. And then in part I feel like, well, that they're part of me, right? So then I'm proud of me too for having done that.
I love that.
I don't know about you, but I really struggle with the words "I am proud of you" because I always feel like, who am I to be proud of anyone? But I heard something recently that I've been using and I love it, and it's "I'm proud for you."
Oh, I love the four. And Tracy, I have the same issue except as it relates to my kids.
Yeah.
I do feel it's okay to say I'm proud of you, but I had a recent thing with a woman I'm doing work with for Under the
Mhm.
Sisterhood, and she shared an accomplishment, and I just said, I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be proud of you. She said to me, Elizabeth, I am so happy that you're proud of me. You have every right to be proud of me. And I'm just like watching her journey, like she wanted to hear that. And so it's an interesting thing. I like the four, but I think on the other side of it is just acknowledging someone with that kind of like love and seeing them, witnessing them in shining their light. This woman was, it was like I had my heart was, my cup was overflowing when she said that, because I'm like, it's not my right to do that. And so, but
Like with my kids, why I never say I'm proud of you, because it's not important that I'm proud of you. It's important that you're proud of you. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I think, especially as women, that's where we get all tripped up, wanting everybody to be proud of us. And if people aren't proud of us, then we're not proud of us. It's like BS.
you know what? I love that, Tracy. You're absolutely right. And it's a tricky cycle because it's systemic. And if we go back and we think about how it all began with the system, that women need to feel this way or should even feel, that they can't share that.
And, for me, I can now say this because it's so clear in my brain. A big part of why I am so driven and accomplishment focused is this just chronic, need to have my parents, who I'm pretty confident, not diagnosed, but well, I'm very confident there's autism, also ADHD. Like, I'm such a touchy feely person. And so all I wanted was to hear them say, "We're proud of you. I'm proud of you." And I can literally, I don't even know if I can, maybe two fingers or maybe one even, that I ever remember hearing that. And so it's taken a lot for me to finally get to the point where, screw that. I want to be proud of me. Because you may be proud of me for things that I don't really think you should be proud of me for, like what I've accomplished.
Tracy, oh my goodness, you just touched a
A nerve?
when my father passed, rest in peace, Dad, was it in 2018? So what, 7 years ago? That he passed. We were in the hospital, and I went with my stepmother, and I don't know if my brothers were staying at my brother's house or whatever. And so we went out for dinner, and it was just the two of us. And we were talking about my father, and my father was a very idiosyncratic nonconformist. So both my parents were, and they gave me permission to be. But he was his own person. He was always his authentic self, which was challenging for him. And what I would say is, I said, my stepmother was like, your father was so proud of you. And I said, yeah. He used to go and tell everybody that my daughter is an executive and a leader, blah. And I said, you know what, Chris? I said, my dad was proud. Dad was proud of my accomplishments. If he knew who I was as a human being, then he'd be proud. That's what you want to be proud of, because anybody can accomplish anything. And hopefully they do it with integrity. But who you are and how you show up in this world and the opportunity to affect people's lives and touch people is so much more important than any sort of, in fact, that to me is a greater accomplishment than, winning, awards or whatever it is.
Or making billions of dollars.
Mm. I'm not motivated. I'm not inspired by that. That's part of the job when I was in that space, but more motivated by doing work that changes lives, that moves mountains.
Okay, so perfect segue. So you work in purpose-driven spaces up the yin yang, um, where there's impact baked into everything you do. Do you think that ADHD makes you more mission-driven? And if so, why do you think that you're so drawn to work that matters? And maybe that's the first question, and then we can back into that, the ADHD part.
So I'm not sure. That's a great question. I think what the ADHD gives me, and we've had this conversation quite a bit around the desire to, with the status quo. Like I don't live in status quo space. That is not where I am uncomfortable living in the status quo. So I like change for me, even though there's moments when I can be a little fearful of it, I run to that. I'm more fearless in that space. And so I think that is part of ADHD. If I think through it, I haven't thought, you're asking me this in this moment. So I would now back into and say, yes, I think it's an ADHD thing. And I'll tell you why. Because that aligns with the impulsive nature of ADHD. What I've taken is the impulse in me, the restlessness in me, and I've turned it into a superpower where I run into a situation fearless. I identify an unmet need and I invest in that and I create in that space. And I'm also not afraid to fail fast and pivot accordingly. I don't get so stuck in. And so I think that ADHD is a part of that. I never thought of it that way, but thank you for asking the question, because I think the impulsive side of me that goes to that and is a little, a lot of people are risk adverse. I'm not risk adverse. And it doesn't mean I don't have moments where I'm not feeling vulnerable. I'm like, oh my goodness, what did I just do? And then I'm like, oh yeah, you did the right thing. Because it's never out of integrity. It's more like, boy, creating otherhood is anti-system right now. It is anti-establishment. It is saying, look, no, we are not going to erase people. We are not going to look at people differently. We are going to shine a light on their beauty. We are going to give them voice. We are going to celebrate them. We are going to ensure that the brands who are happy to take their money are creating for them.
I think there's also the justice sensitivity, right? Which comes from, you already told me you're an empath, so you're high empathy, which a lot of us with ADHD can relate to that as well. So it makes perfect sense to me. And then you've got the drivenness, because you would probably be combined, I would say, hyperactive. Because you're a doer, right? You've learned that when you get into action, you get out of your head. And that helps. One final question. I want to know what you've learned about raising ADHD children that you wish more people, especially parents or educators, understood about how our brains actually really work.
I love this question. And I'd say the message here is to all parents is to celebrate where your kids lean towards. Not that they should be deficient in the other areas, just recognize that people are wired and made up differently and it starts at a young age. And when you see your child is different, don't look at trying to normalize them, celebrate their neurodivergent minds and thinking, and know that there's genius in them, and give them and create a safe runway, create a safe space that they can show up as their authentic selves, be understood as a parent because they want to feel safe that they can be who they are. And know that if you create that and if you do the work and really let them focus on where their talents lie, they're going to be happy. Because like the thing is like you're a child for how many years? You're 18. So from that young age to 18, and then you leave the house, and it's at those transition points where if you do your job with neurodivergent thinkers and you build this space where they can be themselves, they can go out into the world and be themselves and show up in spaces and find what really lights them on fire. And when I say that, I mean, professionally, most of us have to work and we don't have money, so we have to find a means to sustain ourselves. And in doing so, it's much better when you're doing things that are more meaningful to you. And so if parents recognize that it takes all kinds. I wrote a headline, by the way, for Citibank. It was a really interesting campaign, but the headline was, it takes all kinds, so do our ATMs. And I think it takes all kinds, and parents need to recognize that you could have three kids, two kids could be very academic, they could be so centered on this and things could be easy. The third kid, and I'm not saying this is my family, I'm just saying this could be a family. And the third kid could be great at sport, great at this, great at that, and struggle with that. And that would have been me. So if you create a space where the kids know that it's okay to be different, and actually, maybe it's more than okay. Being different is actually brilliant. Being other is brilliant. Let's celebrate your otherness and your difference, and let's like help you find those things that make you different, that can ignite you. Because life is long. It's a long journey. And so how do you create these families? Because it's interesting, I was just having this conversation with someone else. Like, I go back into my family and I take on that role regardless of where I am age wise, that I wasn't as a child, but I'm a different person today. So you really want to create this runway where your child at every stage of their life feels like that their differences are honored and really acknowledged and celebrated. And then witnessing them as a parent in peace and happiness and with grace, I think is really important.
Absolutely love it. Brilliant advice. So, Elizabeth, are you working on something that you want to tell us about?
Well, I think I'm working on a lot.
Where do we want to send people if they want to know more about you?
Anybody who wants to share a story, women under the sisterhood, we would love to hear from you. Reach out to me at elizabeth@underthesisterhood.com. For companies, for people, companies, startups who want to create mission-driven branding, who want to both acknowledge and really serve overlooked communities, reach out to me, elizabeth@otherhoodagency.com. I've done a lot of work over my lifetime, a lot of really creative work, and being in service of communities that aren't getting what they need is really meaningful work, and every company needs to be doing it. So reach out to me if you need any help there. And yeah, and Sisterhood, our not-for-profit, if you want to support women in developing communities, we would love your support there. And you can reach out to my executive director, Amy, at underthesisterhood.com. Thank you.
So, give us the first URL.
Wonderful. Otherhoodagency.com. Yeah.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. I just so appreciated having this conversation. I knew it was going to be good.
Oh, Tracy, thank you. I mean, you're a wonderful host, and I love the questions and the nuances in them and really getting under the hood of ADHD. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate your platform and all the work you're doing.
Ditto. So, that's what I have for you for this week. If you have been listening to this podcast for a while and you've ever thought, I really should write a review, this is your sign to actually do it. Maybe this podcast helped you understand your brain better. Maybe it made you laugh when you really needed it. Maybe you finally felt seen, heard, and understood, whatever the reason. If it's made a difference in your life, I'd love for you to take 60 seconds to write a quick review on Apple Podcasts. That's where most of our listeners listen. It is one of the best ways to help more brilliant ADHD women find this show. And if you've gotten anything out of it, this is your chance to give back. Thank you so much. And I will see you here next week.